Imagine boarding a plane, ticket in hand, only to be shoved aside, humiliated, and told you don't belong. Now, imagine that passenger isn't just anyone, she's the silent owner of the very airline in which she's being denied dignity. This is the true heart of Selena Carter's story. A calm, poised woman forced into the spotlight at 35,000 feet when a flight attendant crossed the line. But here's the question that electrified millions: what happens when the person they tried to push out is the one holding ultimate power to change everything, from whispers in the cabin to a storm on the ground? Selena's journey reveals more than a single act of cruelty. It unravels a system built on silence. And once that silence breaks, the world will never see air travel the same way again. Will dignity finally take its rightful seat on board, or will the same cycle repeat itself, hidden until the next headline? Stay with us as we dive into this gripping, true-to-life tale. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us shine a light on truth. Now, let's begin. Flight attendant kicked black girl off plane, then froze when she said, "I own this airline." The morning sun slanted through the glass walls of Boston Logan's Terminal C, painting the floor in the fractured squares of orange light. Flight NS-247, bound for San Francisco, was boarding soon. The air smelled faintly of coffee, disinfectant, and anticipation, the kind of charged stillness that clung to airports at dawn. Selena Carter adjusted the strap of her worn leather messenger bag as she approached the gate. She was 28, with the calm poise of someone who had learned long ago how to carry storms in silence. Her vintage blazer sat loosely over a faded t-shirt. Her jeans comfortable but clearly lived in. She moved with purpose, though nothing about her appearance shouted privilege or wealth. And maybe that was exactly why what happened next unfolded the way it did. At the gate, Claudia Mercer stood like she owned the space. Senior flight attendant, 15 years in uniform, with the kind of authority that comes from habit rather than true respect. Her lips curled almost before Selena had spoken. "Ma'am, my seat is 14C, Selena said softly, holding up her boarding pass. "I have a valid ticket." Claudia's eyes raked her up and down, disdain sharp enough to cut. "Sure you do," she sneered. "Another scammer thinking a printed slip makes you a passenger. Take your welfare check somewhere else. Sweetheart, we don't need trash like you slowing us down." The words exploded in the air. A few heads turned. The crowd at the gate seemed to freeze. Selena's breath caught in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She only repeated, steady as stone, "Row 14, seat C." Claudia's response was to shove her shoulder. The move was sudden, physical, ugly. Selena stumbled back, her messenger bag tearing open as it hit the polished floor. Papers spilled in a fluttering mess. A laptop clattered to one side, and a business card slid beneath a businessman's loafer. For a heartbeat, the entire terminal seemed to lean in. Designer shoes stepped carefully around her things. Voices murmured. Phones slipped into hands, screens already glowing. Selena knelt, gathering her belongings, each motion deliberate, almost ceremonial, as if refusing to let the moment shatter her dignity. "Pick up your garbage before someone steps in it," Claudia barked. "This isn't the projects." The venom in her voice echoed against the glass. Selena breathed slowly, stacking her documents. Her fingers brushed the edge of a platinum card before tucking it deep into her wallet, hidden from sight. No one needed to see it yet, not until the right time. "Boarding will close in 10 minutes. called Ethan Brooks, the young gate agent. His voice nervous as his eyes darted between the senior flight attendant and the gathering crowd. His hands trembled on the intercom mic. He looked like he wanted to intervene but didn't know how. Claudia crossed her arms, planting herself in front of the jet bridge like a guard dog. "I don't care what that fake boarding pass says. You're not getting on my aircraft looking like you just crawled out of Section 8 housing." Whispers started to ripple through the line. A woman in pearls leaned toward her husband, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "She probably stole someone's ticket," the man added, without lowering his tone, or used a stolen card. Selena rose to her feet, blazer shifting against her shoulders. She held her pass higher, her voice still calm. "I purchased this ticket legally. My confirmation number is Save It." Claudia cut her off. Her voice dripped contempt. Theatrical now. Playing for the audience she knew she had. Save it for someone who cares. Security's already on their way to drag you out. Maybe next time you'll think twice before trying to fly above your pay grade. The crowd stirred uneasily. Some shifted their weight, some turned away, and some began quietly recording on their phones. 3 rows back, a graduate student named Kayla Monroe had already lifted hers, streaming to Instagram Live. The caption flickered across the screen. "This is insane. They're refusing to let a black woman board her flight. NS-247 Boston Logan. Her followers jumped from a few dozen to a few hundred in seconds." Comments scrolled, "This is disgusting. Sue them all. Where's this happening? Spread it." At 6:52 a.m., Ethan Brooks tried again, voice almost pleading. "Claudia, maybe we should just check the manifest. Don't you dare question me," she snapped. "I've been doing this job since before this little ghetto princess learned to walk." Selena's jaw tightened, but her eyes softened with something like pity. She'd seen people like Claudia before, armed with just enough power to mistake cruelty for control. Still, her silence wasn't weakness. It was restraint, a choice. By 6:54 a.m., the tension was thick enough to touch. Claudia raised her voice even louder, turning to the passengers now openly filming. "Look at her. Does she look like she belongs in first-class hell? Does she look like she belongs on an airplane at all?" "I'm seated in economy," Selena said quietly, her voice steady. "Row 14, seat C," Claudia scoffed. Probably printed that at home on her welfare computer. "You know how these people operate. Scam their way in, then cry racism when they get caught." The words struck the air like a whip. A man in a business suit pulled out his phone. He didn't record, not yet, but his thumb hovered close to the button. The gate was no longer just a checkpoint. It was becoming a stage. By 6:55, Claudia had already reached for her radio. "We have a disruptive passenger attempting to board with fraudulent documentation," she declared, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "Send backup." Selena's bag still lay open at her feet, papers half collected. For those who looked closely, the evidence was undeniable documents stamped with North Star Airways consulting letterhead. A receipt from the VIP lounge time-stamped an hour earlier, and a phone buzzing with a message about a critical board meeting at 9. Her world was larger than anyone here imagined. But for now, she said nothing. Silence was her sharpest weapon. Kayla whispered into her phone camera, her voice shaking. "This is either going to end really badly or—" She didn't finish. Her live stream count ticked upward again. Hundreds turned into thousands. The story was no longer confined to Gate C-17. It was already spilling into the world outside. Selena straightened slowly. slipping her documents back into the bag. Her face was composed, her breath even, her eyes steady on Claudia. The hum of the terminal seemed louder now. The crowd leaned closer, waiting. A storm was brewing, but Selena still stood at its calm center, and the morning was only just beginning. By 6:56 p.m., 2 TSA officers appeared at the gate, their heavy steps echoing against the polished floor. Officer Daniel Torres was older, his eyes carrying the weary patience of someone who had seen too many airport arguments. Beside him, Officer Luis Ramirez was younger, sharper, still clinging to the illusion that authority could solve everything. Their arrival cut through the murmurs, tightening the atmosphere like a drawn bowstring. "What's the situation?" Torres asked, his voice steady but tinged with suspicion. Claudia Mercer wasted no time. She gestured toward Selena with dramatic flair, as though presenting evidence to a jury. This passenger attempted to board with suspicious documentation. When questioned, she became combative and refused to comply with crew instructions. "That's not accurate," Selena said, her voice low but clear. Her calmness stood in stark contrast to Claudia's shrill insistence. She held her boarding pass gently between two fingers, as if it were fragile. "My seat is 14C. I've complied with every instruction given to me." "See?" Claudia shot back triumphantly. "Arguing with federal officers already? I told you she was trouble." Phones lifted higher into the air. The glow of screens multiplied like fireflies in the crowd. Kayla Monroe's Instagram live count surged past 1,200 viewers. Comments flashed in real time. "She's calm. The flight attendant is lying. They're really about to drag her out. Stay strong. Sis?" The officers exchanged a glance. Ramirez took the boarding pass from Selena, scanning it carefully against his tablet. He frowned, scrolling, checking again. "It looks legitimate to me." Claudia scoffed loudly. "Don't let her fool you. These people are experts at document fraud. Probably learned it in prison." Gasps rippled through the passengers. Even those who had remained silent shifted uncomfortably at the venom in her words. A man in a navy blazer muttered, "That's too far." Though he didn't step forward, fear kept him anchored to the floor. Selena inhaled slowly, her chest rising and falling with deliberate steadiness. She said nothing. Her silence wasn't surrender, it was strategy. She knew the power of letting others expose themselves. By 6:58 a.m., the gate had transformed into a theater. A businessman in 3A began a Twitter thread, "Discrimination happening right now at Logan Gate C-17. Flight attendant calling black woman trash, refusing boarding despite valid ticket." Retweets spread like wildfire. Within 60 seconds, the post had been shared 23 times. Within 2 minutes, nearly 200. Ethan Brooks, the young gate agent, clutched his radio, his face pale. He whispered into the mouthpiece, "Gate C-17 to operations. We need ground support immediately. Situation escalating." His voice cracked with the weight of responsibility he wasn't ready to carry. Passengers divided visibly. On one side, younger travelers with phones raised, outrage etched across their faces. On the other, older business-class regulars, arms crossed, nodding subtly at Claudia's authority. The divide was generational, ideological, and painfully clear. A teenage girl with purple hair shouted from the back, "This is totally unfair. She has a ticket just like everyone else." Her mother hushed her, embarrassed. "Don't get involved, Morgan." But the girl refused to shrink. Her voice carried farther than she knew. At 6:59, Captain Anthony Ramirez stepped out from the jet bridge. His uniform was impeccable, his silver hair catching the morning light. Authority radiated from him, but his brow was furrowed, his mouth set in a tight line. He had flown for 30 years, commanded storms and emergency landings. But few things unsettled him more than a scene like this chaos at the gate, magnified by 100 phones. "What's the holdup?" he demanded. Claudia straightened her posture, smoothing her uniform as if it could disguise the venom in her voice. "Captain, this passenger presented questionable documentation. I followed protocol." The captain's eyes scanned the scene. Selena standing calmly amid her scattered belongings, the circle of phones recording every angle, the TSA officers hesitating, the gate agent sweating. His gut told him this was more than a boarding issue. This was a crisis unfolding in real time. Before he could respond, a new presence entered the fray. Olivia Chen, the gate supervisor, strode forward with brisk steps, a tablet tucked under her arm. Her expression was professional, her voice sharp. "I understand we have a boarding dispute," she said. "Let me review the manifest." The air thickened further. Kayla's live stream topped 3,500 viewers. Comments poured in like a torrent. "Supervisors here. Let's see if she makes it worse. Stay calm. Sis, you've got the world watching. North Star better handle this or I'm canceling my miles card." Selena felt her pulse steady as Olivia scrolled through the records. She wasn't afraid. Not of this. What pressed against her chest was something different. Sorrow. She'd lived long enough to know how quickly strangers turned into accusers when prejudice whispered in their ears. Her silence was both armor and grief. Olivia's brow furrowed. "Ms. Carter, according to this, you accessed the Horizon Lounge at 5:47 a.m. this morning. Platinum Elite status." She looked up, confusion flickering across her face. "That suggests probably snuck in behind someone?" Claudia interrupted, voice dripping with disdain. "Security at those lounges is a joke, or used a stolen card." The crowd erupted in murmurs again. Some passengers recoiled, disgusted by Claudia's persistence. Others leaned in closer, their faces tight with doubt, still unwilling to let go of the story they wanted to believe. At 7:01 a.m., the situation reached a tipping point. Officer Torres muttered into his radio, requesting additional personnel, possible removal situation. His tone was reluctant, but procedure bound him. Selena closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She thought of her grandfather, the man who had once told her, "Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet hand on the wheel that changes the course of the ship." The words steadied her, but a quiet ache filled her chest. Why did she still have to fight these battles? Why, in 2025, did dignity still feel like a weapon she had to unsheath? Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced down at the screen. A single contact stared back at her. Richard, direct line. She hesitated, not because she doubted her right, but because she understood the weight of unleashing that call. It would turn this from a personal humiliation into a corporate earthquake. Was she ready to strike that match? Claudia saw the phone in her hand and laughed. Cruel and theatrical. "What? Calling your public defender, sweetheart. Greyhound buses don't require boarding passes. Maybe that's more your style." Laughter trickled through a few corners of the crowd, though it was thin, nervous, forced. Others shook their heads in disbelief. Kayla whispered into her stream. "She's about to make a call. I don't know who, but this feels big. At 7:03 Captain Ramirez pressed his lips together and sighed. If this isn't resolved in the next 2 minutes, I'll deplane everyone and start over. Safety comes first. Groans echoed through the crowd. Business travelers checked watches. Parents rocked tired children, and frustration spread like wildfire. Selena exhaled. The moment had come. She lifted the phone slowly, deliberately, every eye on her. Her thumb hovered over the call button. For an instant, doubt flickered inside her. Did she really want to reveal who she was? Did she want to shatter the anonymity she had cherished, the ability to walk through the world as just another traveler? Her grandfather's voice echoed again in memory. Sometimes, baby girl, you don't get to choose when history knocks. You only get to decide if you'll answer. She pressed the button. The line began to ring. Once, twice, 3 times. Claudia smirked, turning to the crowd, straight to voicemail. Just like I said. On the 4th ring, a voice answered. Crisp, commanding, unmistakably corporate. North Star Airways Executive Office. This is Richard Lawson. The crowd froze. Silence fell across the gate like a blanket. Even Claudia's smirk faltered. Kayla's live stream exploded past 7,000 viewers. Every camera zoomed in on Selena, who spoke with the same quiet dignity she had carried from the first insult. Richard, she said evenly, it's Selena. I'm at Gate C-17 flight NS-247. There's been a misunderstanding about my right to board. For the first time since the ordeal began, Claudia's face drained of color. She didn't know why yet, but she was about to. The sound of Richard Lawson's voice carried through Selena's phone like a gavel striking in a courtroom. It wasn't loud, but it commanded the space instantly. Every passenger who had been murmuring just moments before fell silent, as though the simple cadence of his greeting demanded attention. Richard, Selena said, her voice steady. It's Selena Carter. I'm at Gate C-17 flight NS-247. There's been a situation. There was a pause on the line, not of confusion, but of calculation. Richard Lawson had the kind of presence that could be felt even through static. Selena, he said, and even his tone of familiarity made Claudia blink. Tell me exactly what happened. Claudia, still clutching the radio at her hip, tried to regain her footing. This passenger, this woman, attempted to board with fraudulent documents. She interjected loudly, desperate to control the narrative. She's been disruptive, refused crew instructions, and stop. Richard's voice cut across the air like a knife. It wasn't a shout, but its authority was absolute. Claudia's mouth snapped shut, shock and indignation colliding on her face. The passengers leaned closer, sensing they were witnessing something historic, a kind of justice they weren't accustomed to seeing unfold live. Selena adjusted the phone so the speaker carried his voice clearly. Richard, I've presented my boarding pass 3 times. I've been called trash, shoved to the ground, and accused of fraud. All of this in front of over 100 witnesses. And now TSA officers are considering removing me. The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the distant beeping of a cart reversing somewhere down the concourse. Kayla Monroe's phone screen showed her live stream count vault past $12,000. The comments blurred in rapid fire. This is insane. She knows the CEO personally. Who is she? I can't look away. Richard exhaled into the line. Selena, hand your phone to the captain. Captain Anthony Ramirez hesitated, but Selena extended the phone toward him, her eyes unwavering. Slowly, he accepted it, pressing the speaker close to his ear. "This is Captain Ramirez." "Captain." Richard's voice was measured, deliberate. "You're speaking to the principal owner of North Star Airways. Selina Carter is not only a valued passenger, she is the majority shareholder of the airline you are about to fly. Do you understand me?" The words detonated like thunder. A collective gasp rose from the crowd, a sound raw and unfiltered. Claudia staggered back a step, her complexion draining. Olivia Chen's eyes widened, her tablet nearly slipping from her grip. Even the TSA officers froze, their authority suddenly dwarfed by the revelation. Selina stood calm in the center of it all, her stillness radiant. She hadn't raised her voice once, and yet the entire gate now revolved around her presence. Richard continued, his tone sharp, effective immediately. "Claudia Mercer is relieved of duty. Supervisor Chen, you will ensure she is removed from the premises and escorted off the property. Gate Agent Brooks, document everything and forward the footage to corporate compliance. Captain Ramirez, confirm to me that Ms. Carter will be seated safely in her assigned row." "Yes, sir," Ramirez said, his throat dry. He handed the phone back to Selina, but his eyes didn't meet hers. Not yet. He wasn't sure if he deserved to. Claudia found her voice again, though it trembled. "This is outrageous. I have served this airline for 15 years. You can't just, you've already done enough," Richard interrupted coldly. "Your employment is terminated. Security will meet you at the jet bridge. Any attempt to resist will result in trespassing charges." Gasps spread again. The passengers who had stayed quiet now buzzed with astonishment. The man in the navy blazer who had once nodded in agreement with Claudia muttered to his wife, She owns the airline." The woman with pearls clutched her handbag tighter, shame flushing her cheeks. Claudia's bravado crumbled into desperation. "Selina, Ms. Carter, this is a mistake. You don't understand. I was just following protocol. You know how many people try to sneak on flights, people who don't belong." Selina's gaze locked onto her, calm yet piercing. "What you said wasn't about protocol. It was about prejudice. You shoved me. You called me names. You treated me as less than human. That wasn't company policy. That was you." Claudia faltered, her lips trembling. The cameras captured every second. Kayla's live stream surged past 20,000 viewers. Comments poured in. She called her out perfectly. This is history. Claudia just ruined her life. Finally, accountability. By 7:09 a.m., Claudia was escorted aside by TSA officers, though it was clear the true weight of her downfall came not from them, but from the collective gaze of every passenger and every screen now recording her humiliation. She shrank as she realized this wasn't just a firing. It was a public reckoning. Selina lifted the phone again. "Thank you, Richard. But this isn't just about me. If this can happen to the majority shareholder of the airline, imagine what happens to passengers without power, without connections. Imagine how many stories go unseen." Her voice carried across the terminal, soft but resonant. Passengers leaned in, captivated. Even those who had once doubted her now felt the sting of guilt. "You're absolutely right," Richard said. "Consider this the beginning. Effective today, I'm launching a full review of our frontline policies. We will implement bias and de-escalation training immediately. Every incident will be documented and escalated directly to my office, and we will create an independent passenger advocacy board to ensure accountability. This isn't optional. It's survival. Olivia Chen swallowed hard, nodding instinctively as if he could see her. Ethan Brooks scribbled frantically into his notes, though his hands shook. The captain shifted his weight uncomfortably, realizing he had nearly sided with Claudia moments earlier. Selena's eyes softened, though her voice remained steady. That's a start. But words aren't enough. Actions will decide if North Star deserves to keep the trust of the people watching right now. She gestured subtly toward Kayla, whose phone screen now displayed 28,000 live viewers. The number was climbing every second. This wasn't just a private dispute anymore. It was a global broadcast. Claudia's removal had left a strange vacuum at the gate. The passengers stared at Selena not as a stranger now, but as someone transformed. The girl they had doubted was suddenly revealed as the woman who controlled their flight, their airline, their narrative. Some lowered their phones, ashamed of their earlier silence. Others whispered apologies under their breath. A few approached cautiously, as though proximity might somehow absolve them. Selena didn't bask in their shifting loyalties. Her expression was unreadable, her silence purposeful. Power, she knew, wasn't about spectacle. It was about what came after. At 7:12, Richard's voice returned. "Selena, I'll have a car waiting in San Francisco. Board the plane. Sit wherever you want. And know this, your dignity will never be up for debate again." She ended the call quietly, slipping the phone back into her bag. For a moment, the hum of the terminal filled the silence once more. Then Captain Ramirez cleared his throat, his voice subdued. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll continue boarding. Please take your seats. We'll depart as soon as possible." Selena stepped forward, her boarding pass still clutched in her hand. She didn't ask for first class. She didn't demand special treatment. She walked calmly down the jet bridge toward row 14, the seat she had chosen when she booked her ticket. Her steps were steady, her shoulders straight. The eyes of every passenger followed her, recording, whispering, learning. And, though the flight hadn't even left the ground, everyone knew they had already been carried somewhere else entirely. The jet bridge hummed with the shuffle of boarding passengers, the metallic echo of rolling carry-ons, the faint chatter of flight attendants trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But nothing about Flight NS-247 felt normal anymore. Every person stepping onto the plane carried the weight of what had just unfolded at the gate. Phones buzzed with notifications. Friends and strangers alike were already sharing clips from Kayla Monroe's live stream. The story was spreading faster than anyone could keep pace with. Selena Carter walked calmly down the narrow aisle, her boarding pass still in her hand. Row 14 waited for her, a middle seat she had chosen intentionally. She could have sat anywhere, first class included, but anonymity mattered to her. Or, at least, it had before the morning tore it away. Now, every eye that flicked toward her knew. She wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was the woman who owned the airline. The air inside the cabin felt different, charged, as though the recycled oxygen carried whispers. A man in 14A, broad-shouldered, with the tired look of someone who had spent too many nights in hotel rooms, stood quickly as she approached. "Take the window," he said, his voice softer than his size suggested. "You shouldn't have to sit in the middle." Selena offered a small smile. "Thank you, but I'll sit where I booked. It's all right." He hesitated, then nodded, sliding back into his seat. Across the aisle, a woman with a baby clutched the child closer, guilt flashing across her face. She had been one of the first to murmur suspicions earlier at the gate. Now she couldn't bring herself to meet Selena's eyes. As Selena settled into 14C, tucking her bag carefully beneath the seat in front of her, the whispers continued. Some passengers leaned toward one another in disbelief. "She really owns the airline?" one asked. "All of it." His companion shook his head. "Not all, but enough to make the rules, and they just threw her on the ground." Every detail of her calm composure amplified the contrast to Claudia Mercer's rage. Where Claudia had been venom, Selena was water quiet, steady, flowing into every corner of the cabin without needing to force it. People watched her in silence, some ashamed, some awed, and a few visibly defensive, still clinging to the narrative that had just collapsed around them. In the cockpit, Captain Anthony Ramirez sat heavily in his chair, running a hand over his face. He had nearly sided with Claudia. The thought burned in his chest. 30 years of flying, thousands of lives under his responsibility, and still he had nearly let convenience outweigh justice. He could already feel the cameras in the cabin, the posts online, the scrutiny building, but worse than that was the quiet image of Selena standing calm while he had doubted her. His jaw tightened. He would make this right, or at least try. Back in the cabin, Olivia Chen walked down the aisle, clipboard in hand. She had been silent at the gate, paralyzed between duty and morality, but now her face was pale with recognition of the damage done. She stopped near row 14, glancing down at Selena. "Ms. Carter," she began softly, almost too softly for anyone else to hear. I'm so sorry for what happened out there. I should have stepped in sooner." Selena looked up at her, her eyes steady. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "But this isn't just about me. How many other people have been silenced because no one stepped in?" Olivia swallowed hard. The question cut deeper than any rebuke could have. She nodded once, retreating back toward the galley, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. By 7:25, boarding was nearly complete. Passengers stowed their bags quickly, their movements sharper, more self-conscious than usual. The tension was palpable. Kayla Monroe slid into her seat near the back, phone still buzzing with notifications. Her live stream had ended when boarding began, but clips were already circulating, stitched into TikTok montages, dissected on Twitter threads, replayed on Facebook pages. She had captured history, and though she was exhilarated, she was also unsettled. She kept replaying Selena's face in her mind, calm, deliberate, carrying centuries of weight in silence. The flight attendants who remained on board were subdued, their voices hushed. One, a young man named Adrian, passed through the rows offering assistance with overhead bins, but his smile was tight, forced. He had watched Claudia's downfall unfold inches away and knew how thin the line between power and collapse could be. He glanced toward Selena once, their eyes meeting briefly. She nodded at him, a silent acknowledgement of the quiet kindness he hadn't dared show earlier. His chest loosened just a little. As the last passenger boarded, Captain Ramirez made the usual announcement over the intercom, but his voice carried an unusual gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard North Star Airways Flight 247 from Boston to San Francisco. Our flight time today is 6 hours and 20 minutes. Please take your seats and fasten your seat belts. We'll be departing shortly." He paused, his finger hovering over the button, then pressed it again. I'd like to personally thank you for your patience during the delay. This morning has been challenging, but we are committed to ensuring that all passengers are treated with respect and dignity, both today and moving forward." The words weren't standard script. They were his attempt at contrition, though they only hinted at the storm raging beyond the fuselage. Some passengers murmured approval, others simply nodded, relieved to finally push back from the gate. Selena sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Her mind was a swirl of conflicting emotions. She had defended her dignity. Yes, but she had also revealed herself in a way she hadn't planned. Ownership came with responsibility, and responsibility meant every word, every silence, every choice would ripple outward. She thought of the anonymous people who never had the chance to make that call to Richard Lawson, who were dragged from planes without witnesses, without justice. The thought pressed heavy on her chest. The plane taxied toward the runway, the engine's low rumble filling the cabin. Out the window, the early morning sun had risen higher, gilding the tarmac in sharp light. Selena's reflection flickered faintly against the glass, superimposed over the moving scenery. For a fleeting second, she saw herself as the world now did not just a passenger, but a symbol. A child across the aisle tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, is that the lady from the video?" he whispered. His mother hushed him quickly, embarrassment color in her face, but Selena smiled gently at the boy. "Yes," she said softly, "that's me." The boy grinned, unfiltered by the weight of adult prejudice, and returned to his coloring book. The moment warmed her, a reminder that change began with the smallest acknowledgments. As the engines roared and the plane lifted into the sky, the cabin pressed into silence. The ascent was smooth, clouds parting below them, but the silence was not peace. It was reflection. Every person on that flight knew they were part of a story that would echo far beyond the aluminum walls of the aircraft. Selena leaned back, closing her eyes briefly. Her mind replayed the insults, the shove, the humiliation. She remembered the way Claudia's voice had cut, the way the crowd had watched in silence, the way only a few had dared to speak up. A question gnawed at her: had she done the right thing by revealing herself, or had she lost something she could never get back, her ability to walk the world unseen, to be just another traveler? Yet beneath the doubts, a quiet resolve formed. This wasn't about comfort anymore. It was about responsibility. If her position could change the system, then anonymity was a price she was willing to pay. She opened her eyes again, gazing at the seat back in front of her, seeing not just plastic and fabric but the future passengers who would sit here, who deserved better than what she endured. At 7:40, the seatbelt sign dinged softly. Passengers loosened their belts, pulled out laptops, headphones, and books. The cabin began to resemble normalcy again, but it was a fragile illusion. The undercurrent of the morning still pulsed beneath every interaction. Eyes still darted toward row 14, phones still buzzed with updates from the outside world, and in the galley, whispers still swirled among the remaining crew, uncertain of their place in the storm. Selena rested her palms on her knees, grounding herself. The flight was only beginning, but she knew the real turbulence lay ahead, not in the air, but in the confrontation of truths too long ignored. The hum of the engines settled into a steady rhythm, a low vibration that filled the cabin like background music. At 35,000 feet, the world outside was a blur of clouds and sky, But inside the cabin of Flight NS-247, no one felt removed from the ground. If anything, the higher they climbed, the heavier the weight of the morning pressed on every passenger. Phones buzzed constantly, despite airplane mode. Screens flickered with cached notifications, messages queued up before takeoff now pouring in. Passengers whispered as they scrolled through snippets of Kayla Monroe's livestream, replayed and reshared across every platform imaginable. On Twitter, hashtags surged: a North Star scandal, Selena Carter, flying while black. The numbers climbed with brutal speed. In row 14, Selena Carter sat motionless, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had said little since takeoff, but her silence wasn't passive. It was the silence of a chess player considering the next move. Across the aisle, a college student angled his phone just enough to catch glimpses of her. His eyes wide as he whispered to his seatmate, "That's her. The owner. She's right there." Selena heard him. Of course, she heard all of them, but she kept her gaze forward, studying the tiny scratches on the seat back in front of her as though they contained answers. Inside, her thoughts churned. She wondered if anonymity was gone forever. She wondered if she had chosen the right battlefield. She wondered how many people had been broken quietly in moments just like hers, without cameras, without CEOs on speed dial, without the world ready to listen. A flight attendant moved carefully down the aisle. It was Adrian, the young crew member who had avoided Claudia's aggression at the gate. His hands trembled slightly as he offered a tray of water cups. "Would you like one, Ms. Carter?" he asked, his voice so low it barely carried beyond the row. Selena accepted the cup with a nod. "Thank you," she said softly. Her tone was gentle, almost merciful, and Adrian's shoulders eased a little. For him, it was the first acknowledgement that maybe he hadn't failed entirely by staying quiet earlier. Small, but enough to matter. 2 rows ahead, a woman turned in her seat, her expression conflicted. She had been one of the loudest voices of doubt earlier, insisting Selena's pass was fake. Now, shame colored her cheeks. She leaned across the aisle. "Ms. Carter, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. She faltered. "I didn't realize. I shouldn't have said what I said." Selena looked at her steadily, no malice in her gaze. "You didn't need to realize who I was to know it was wrong," she replied. The words were calm, but they landed like a stone dropped in water, sending ripples through nearby rows. The woman sank back into her seat, eyes glistening, her hands folding tightly in her lap. Kayla Monroe sat near the back, her phone still buzzing with alerts, even though the cabin Wi-Fi wasn't strong enough for live streaming. She had caught snippets during taxi, but now she was left with the aftershocks messages from strangers thanking her for exposing the truth. Trolls accusing her of fabricating drama, classmates texting in disbelief. She leaned her head back against the seat and exhaled. "What did I just step into?" she whispered to herself. She hadn't intended to become the chronicler of history, but history had chosen her anyway. In the cockpit, Captain Ramirez adjusted the controls with mechanical precision, though his thoughts were elsewhere. His earlier hesitation haunted him. He had nearly failed not in flying the aircraft, but in standing for dignity when it mattered most. He thought of his daughter, a law student in her 20s. He imagined her in Selena's place, shoved to the ground, called trash. His stomach twisted. He knew he would have never forgiven himself for siding with convenience over truth. Today was a warning he would carry for the rest of his career. Back in row 14, the man in 14A leaned slightly toward Selena. "I watched what happened," he murmured. "You were incredible. I don't know how you stayed so calm." Selena turned her head, meeting his gaze. "You learn over time," she said. "If you let every insult break you, you won't survive long enough to change anything." Her voice held no bitterness, just quiet endurance. The man nodded, unsure how to respond, and turned back to his window, unsettled by the weight of her words. By 8:15 a.m., the first wave of media stories began to break. Though the Wi-Fi lagged, cached notifications revealed headlines already circulating: North Star Airways owner humiliated by own crew. Viral video captures discrimination at 35,000 feet. Who is Selena Carter? The passengers who managed to access the news exchanged stunned looks, holding up screens to show one another. Selena's name was everywhere now. Her anonymity had burned away completely, consumed in the wildfire of public outrage. Selena closed her eyes for a moment, letting the hum of the engines fill her. Doubt whispered again. Had she doomed her quiet life for good? She had never wanted to become a symbol. Symbols were heavy, fragile things. They inspired, yes, but they also became targets. And yet, when she opened her eyes, the conviction returned. If not me, then who, she thought. If I can't carry this, how can I expect anyone else to? Adrian reappeared with a tray of snacks, his movements cautious. "Ms. Carter," he said. "The captain asked if you'd like to move to first class. He thought maybe it would be more comfortable." Selena shook her head gently. "No, I booked 14C. I'll stay here." Adrian hesitated. Understood. He lingered a moment longer, then lowered his voice. "For what it's worth, I'm glad people saw what she said, what she did. It's not the first time. Just the first time with someone who could fight back." Selena studied him, her expression unreadable. "What's your name, Adrian?" he said. "Thank you, Adrian," she replied. "Not for speaking now, but for choosing honesty when it matters. Don't lose that." Adrian nodded quickly, his throat tight, and moved on. The passengers nearby had overheard, their gazes heavy with realization. Claudia hadn't been an isolated incident. She was part of a pattern, and Selena's words had cracked the silence open wide. By 8:30, the plane was cruising smoothly, but the cabin was anything but calm. Conversations rippled in low tones. Some passengers argued with each other about systemic issues, about fairness, about whether they had stood by silently too long. Others sat stiffly, unwilling to face the reflection the morning had forced on them, and a few simply stared at Selena, as though looking at her might answer the questions they couldn't voice. Selena leaned her head back, her eyes drifting closed again. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she saw her grandfather's face, his weathered hands, his quiet wisdom. Power isn't about what you hold. It's about what you release, he'd once told her. She wondered if she was releasing enough now, or if more would be demanded of her before this flight ended. She opened her eyes, exhaled, and reached into her bag. Pulling out her notebook, she flipped to a blank page. With deliberate strokes, she wrote a single line across the top. "Dignity is the fuel. Without it, no plane flies." The words steadied her, a reminder that her battle wasn't just reactive, it was a blueprint for change. Row 14 sat quiet, but the cabin around it was alive with restless energy. Everyone knew they weren't just passengers anymore. They were witnesses, participants, characters in a story that was already shaping the headlines below. And the woman at the center of it, sitting calmly with her notebook, was no longer just a passenger either. She was the storm's eye, steady, unflinching, preparing for the turbulence yet to come. The cabin lights dimmed slightly as the aircraft leveled into its cruising altitude. Outside, the sky stretched endlessly, blue fading into white sheets of cloud. Inside, however, the air felt heavy, as though the recycled oxygen carried every word and wound from the gate with it. Captain Anthony Ramirez sat in the cockpit, his hands steady on the yoke, though his mind refused to settle. He had flown through thunderstorms that rattled every rivet of the fuselage, but nothing shook him quite like the memory of his hesitation an hour earlier. He could still hear Claudia's sharp tone in his ears, the way she had spit venom without flinching. Worse than that, he could hear his own silence. He had nearly allowed convenience to outweigh justice. And for what a quick departure. A smooth timeline, his daughter's face kept intruding in his mind. If she had been the one shoved, insulted, stripped of dignity, would he have stood by Captain, his first officer? Denise Torres said gently, breaking into his thoughts. "Everything all right?" He nodded, though it was half a lie. "Fine. Just thinking." Denise tilted her head, studying him for a moment. "You've been doing this 30 years. You know when something gets under your skin. Don't bottle it up." Ramirez sighed. "I almost made the wrong call. That passenger, Selena Carter. I doubted her. I let Claudia take the lead. If Lawson hadn't intervened..." Denise frowned. "Then it's good you're reflecting now. Better to learn than to bury it. What matters is what you do from here." Ramirez glanced at the instruments again, steady but cold. She was right. And yet the guilt still gnawed at him, relentless. Back in the cabin, row 14 remained the focal point of unspoken attention. Selena Carter sat with her notebook still open on her lap. The line she had written etched firmly across the page. "Dignity is the fuel. Without it, no plane flies." She tapped her pen lightly against the margin, not out of nerves, but out of focus. The words needed weight, and she carried that weight willingly. Passengers glanced her way, some shyly, some openly, their gazes lingering. A middle-aged man in row 15 leaned forward, his voice low. "Ms. Carter, may I ask, why economy? If you own the airline, why not sit up front?" Selena lifted her eyes slowly, meeting his without hostility. "Because I wanted to see what the experience is like for everyone else. Ownership doesn't mean detachment. It means responsibility." His cheeks reddened as though her words had been aimed directly at his assumptions. He leaned back into his seat, chastened but thoughtful. Not all passengers were quiet in their reflection. Near row 10, a sharp voice carried over the hum. "This whole thing is ridiculous." A man in a crisp suit muttered to his neighbor, loud enough for nearby rows to hear. "She should have just let the crew do their job. Always playing the victim card. Now she's turning this into some circus." Several heads turned toward him, disapproval etched into their expressions. A younger woman across the aisle cut in, her tone sharp. "You saw what happened. She was shoved, insulted. That's not a job, that's abuse." The man scoffed. "You people are so quick to scream discrimination. Maybe the flight attendant was just doing her job. Not everything is about race." The cabin tensed. For a moment, silence hung, fragile. Then Selena spoke, her voice carrying clearly despite its calm tone. When dignity is denied, it's never just a job. It becomes a pattern, and patterns don't go away by ignoring them. Her words floated in the air, heavy and undeniable. The man shifted uncomfortably in his seat, unwilling to meet her gaze. Passengers around him nodded subtly, relief mingling with admiration at her composure. Kayla Monroe, seated near the back, felt her chest tighten. She had seen the clips replaying online already, knew the numbers climbing by the second. But being in the same cabin as Selena felt different. There was a gravity to her calmness, a weight that no video could truly capture. Kayla fumbled for her pen, scribbling notes on a napkin. She wasn't just documenting anymore, she was absorbing, learning. By 8:50 a.m., conversations buzzed across the rows like quiet electricity. Some passengers confessed their shame for not speaking earlier. Others debated heatedly about systemic prejudice, policies, responsibility. It was as if the airplane had transformed into a compressed town hall at 35,000 feet. Selena listened more than she spoke. She sipped water occasionally, jotted notes, and allowed silence to stretch when it needed to. When passengers directed questions her way, she answered evenly, without dramatics, as though the truth carried its own force. A young woman in row 13 leaned over the seatback, her voice tentative. "Ms. Carter, do you ever get tired of having to be the calm one all the time?" Selena let out a quiet breath, almost a laugh, but softer. "Every day," she admitted. But tired doesn't mean finished. Sometimes calm is the only weapon left when the world expects you to break. The honesty of her words struck deeply. The woman blinked rapidly, her throat tightening as she whispered, "Thank you." Then she turned back, wiping her eyes discreetly. Adrian, the young flight attendant, reappeared again, moving with unusual gentleness as he checked the cabin. He stopped briefly at row 14, lowering his voice. "Ms. Carter, I wanted you to know, some of us, we don't agree with what happened. Claudia, she had a history. People complained, but it never stuck. You shining a light, maybe it changes things." Selena studied him with quiet intensity. "Then make sure you're part of that change. Don't wait for someone else to carry it." Adrian nodded quickly, a weight settling in his chest. For the first time since takeoff, he felt less like a bystander and more like a participant in something larger than his job. The cabin gradually quieted as meal service began. Trays of plastic-wrapped sandwiches and small drinks distributed row by row. Yet even as passengers peeled open wrappers, the weight of the morning lingered. Screens flickered with cached headlines. Whispers persisted, and eyes returned again and again to the woman in 14C. Selena tore a corner of bread absent-mindedly, her thoughts circling. She thought of the young boy who had smiled at her before takeoff, of Adrian's tremor in his voice, of the shame flickering in passengers' eyes. She thought of her grandfather, of the generations before her who had been denied even the chance to sit silently in dignity, and she thought of the road ahead, the work waiting beyond San Francisco, the reforms Richard Lawson had promised, the scrutiny she knew would follow. When the meal trays were cleared, the man in the suit from row 10 rose suddenly, walking down the aisle toward the lavatory. His movements were stiff, his jaw set. As he passed row 14, his eyes flicked toward Selena again, still sharp with resistance. She met his gaze calmly, and he quickly looked away. Power no longer lay with him, and he knew it. At 9:15, The seatbelt sign chimed softly as the plane entered light turbulence. Passengers buckled in, their conversations quieting briefly. The gentle rocking of the aircraft seemed almost symbolic steady, but unsettled. Like the fragile progress of truth itself, Selina pressed her pen once more to the page of her notebook, writing another line beneath the first. Calm is not surrender, it is strategy. She underlined it once, then closed the notebook, resting her hands on the cover. Her reflection in the darkened window stared back at her, steady and unflinching. In that moment, she understood this flight was more than a journey across the country. It was a crossing between silence and speech, between complicity and accountability, between prejudice and justice, and she was in the center, whether she had chosen it or not. The first jolt came at 9:37 m.m., a sharp dip that rattled overhead bins and caused drinks to slosh in plastic cups. Gasps rippled through the cabin as passengers tightened seat belts and clutched armrests. The captain's voice crackled through the speakers a moment later. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've encountered a patch of turbulence. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. This should pass shortly." The cabin obeyed, but the sudden movement seemed to stir up more than just nerves. Conversations that had simmered in hushed tones flared again, raw and unfiltered. The man in row 10, the one who had scoffed earlier, leaned toward his neighbor, his voice pitched louder than necessary. "See, this is what happens when people make themselves the center of attention. We should be focusing on the flight, not some political stunt." A young woman across the aisle snapped her head toward him. "Are you serious? She didn't make herself the center of anything. She was attacked, and you think she's the problem?" The man sneered. "All I'm saying is, if she hadn't pulled out that phone call to the CEO, we'd be halfway to San Francisco by now, in peace. Instead, the whole airline's in chaos." Several passengers murmured angrily. One muttered, "Chaos doesn't start with the one being shoved." Another added, "It starts with the one doing the shoving." The man raised his voice further. "Oh, come on. Everyone's acting like this is some great civil rights moment. It's one flight attendant having a bad day. Now she's fired. Her career's ruined. And this woman—" He jerked his chin toward Selina, his playing martyr, while the rest of us sit here dealing with the fallout. The tension snapped taut. Kayla Monroe, seated near the back, pulled her phone out again, her hands trembling. Even without Wi-Fi, she felt the need to document, to record every word. Her camera lens glowed faintly as it captured the growing confrontation. The turbulence hit again, shaking the plane more roughly. Luggage shifted in bins overhead. A few passengers yelped, yet the louder tremor was human, not mechanical, the crackling electricity of anger colliding with shame. Selina had remained quiet through the exchange, her notebook still resting on her lap, her posture composed. But now, she lifted her chin, turning slightly in her seat. Her voice carried easily across the rows, calm but firm. "Enough." The word cut through the cabin, sharper than the turbulence. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some expectant, some defensive, all caught in the gravity of her tone. She spoke evenly, her voice steady against the backdrop of the engines. "This isn't about a ruined career. It's about a pattern that ruins lives every day. I was shoved, insulted, and denied dignity not because of what I did, but because of who I am. That doesn't vanish just because the person responsible was fired. It doesn't vanish when the plane takes off. It doesn't vanish when people choose silence. The man in row 10 bristled. So now we're all guilty, is that it? Selina shook her head slowly. Not guilty, but accountable. There's a difference. Silence is not neutral. It allows harm to grow. Every person here had a choice at that gate to speak or to watch. Some chose silence. Some chose complicity. And now you have another choice whether to keep defending that silence or to do better. The cabin was utterly still. Even children seemed hushed, as if sensing the weight of her words. The man flushed, his mouth opening to argue, but no words came. He turned back toward the window, his shoulders stiff, retreating into the only defense left to him avoidance. A woman, 2 rows back, broke the silence, her voice trembling. She's right. I didn't say anything at the gate. I thought it wasn't my business. But watching her on the ground, hearing those words, it was my business. I just didn't want the attention on me. Another passenger added, "Same here." I kept quiet, and I've been thinking about it since. It eats at you. The admissions spread like a quiet contagion. Passengers confessing in low voices, nodding, murmuring agreement. The energy in the cabin shifted, the hostility softening into reflection, then into something closer to solidarity. Selina lowered her eyes briefly, breathing deeply before she spoke again. Accountability isn't about guilt. It's about change. I didn't speak today because I wanted to be seen. I spoke because I had to. Because if someone like me, someone with resources, with power, can be treated that way, imagine what happens to those without. Imagine how many voices are silenced because no one with a camera is watching. Her voice grew softer, yet somehow more powerful. Dignity should not be negotiable. Not for me. Not for anyone. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Some passengers wiped their eyes. Others looked down at their hands, the weight of her truth settling heavily. Kayla's camera caught it all, though she felt almost intrusive, capturing something so raw, yet she couldn't stop. The world needed to see, to hear, to feel this. The turbulence finally eased, the aircraft leveling out once more. But the cabin remained caught in a different kind of storm, one that had nothing to do with air currents. Selina had shifted the axis of the flight. What had begun as a confrontation was now something larger, a reckoning shared by everyone on board. Adrian, standing near the galley, felt his throat tighten. He wanted to applaud, to thank her, but instead he simply stood straighter, pride and shame mingling in his chest. He thought of Claudia, of all the times he had stayed quiet when her words cut others down. Never again, he promised silently. Not after this. Captain Ramirez's voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've cleared the turbulence. You're free to move about the cabin." His tone carried something different this time, humility, even gratitude. He had been listening, too, and, though his words were formal, his silence afterward was weighted with respect for the woman in row 14. Selina sat back in her seat, her eyes closing briefly. She wasn't seeking applause. She wasn't seeking validation. She had spoken because silence was no longer an option, and though exhaustion tugged at her, a quiet certainty replaced it. Change didn't begin in boardrooms or press conferences. It began here in the narrow aisles of a plane, in the confessions of strangers, in the courage to speak when silence was easier. The cabin slowly resumed its rhythm. Children laughed softly, headphones clicked back into place, trays unfolded again, but beneath it all, the passengers carried something heavier now. They would land in San Francisco not just as travelers, but as witnesses, people who had seen what dignity looked like and what its denial cost. Selina rested her hand on her notebook once more. She didn't open it this time. She didn't need to. The words she had spoken were etched deeper than ink. And for the first time that day, she allowed herself a small smile, not of victory, but of resolve. The plane soared forward, steady, as though the sky itself acknowledged the course had shifted. By the time the clock in the cabin touched 10:05, the atmosphere had shifted yet again. The turbulence had passed, but the cabin hummed with an energy no altitude could thin out. Phones lit up like constellations across the rows, each screen glowing with cached notifications trickling through the patchy Wi-Fi. The world on the ground was no longer waiting, it was roaring. A man in row 11 held his phone high for his seatmate to see. "It's everywhere," he whispered. "CNN, the Times, even BBC, they're all running it." His voice trembled with disbelief. "She's on every homepage." Passengers leaned closer, scrolling through headlines that populated their screens. Airline owner humiliated by own staff. Selina Carter, the woman who changed a flight at 7 a.m., North Star Airways under fire as video goes viral. One woman clutched her phone to her chest, whispering to herself, "I was there. I'm on that plane." The realization was both surreal and terrifying. Selina sat quietly in 14C, her notebook closed now, resting on the tray table. The steady hum of the engines and the low murmur of conversation swirled around her. Her phone buzzed once, then again, before she finally reached into her bag to pull it out. On the screen was a secure message from Richard Lawson himself. The subject line was simple update. She opened it, Selina. It read, "We've already issued a preliminary statement to the press. Claudia has been permanently terminated, and we've suspended the entire Boston station pending investigation. By the time you land, there will be a press conference waiting. We need your guidance. This isn't just about one incident anymore. It's about the soul of the company. Call me when you're ready." Selina exhaled slowly, her thumb hovering above the screen. The responsibility she had tried to carry quietly was now unfolding across continents. There would be no retreat, no slipping back into anonymity. The curtain had been pulled open, and the stage was hers whether she wanted it or not. A teenage boy in the row across the aisle leaned toward her, his voice trembling. "Ms. Carter, I just wanted to say, thank you. My mom's Black. She travels for work all the time. I've heard her stories, but I never saw it. Not like this. Now everyone sees." Selina turned to him, her expression softening. "What's your name, Jalen?" he said quickly. "Jalen," she repeated. "Your mom's stories matter. Don't ever think they don't. You make sure people listen." He nodded hard, blinking rapidly, before sinking back into his seat. Further back, Kayla Monroe was still scribbling in the margins of a magazine she'd pulled from the seat pocket. Her phone kept buzzing, but she had stopped checking. She was overwhelmed, half exhilarated, half terrified. Every fiber of her told her that her live stream had been the spark that set this fire ablaze. She wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a burden. Across the aisle, the man in the suit who had protested earlier muttered again, though quieter now, his bravado stripped. "She's turning this whole flight into a trial." His neighbor shot him a glare. "No," she said firmly. "The trial started the moment Claudia put her hands on her. This is the verdict." The man said nothing more. At 10:20, the captain's voice broke through the intercom once more. His tone was steady, but a touch more deliberate than before. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Ramirez. We've been cleared for our cruising altitude. Estimated arrival in San Francisco remains on schedule. I also want to acknowledge that this has not been a typical flight. What happened this morning should never have happened. On behalf of the crew, I extend my apology to Ms. Carter and to all passengers who witnessed it. North Star must and will do better. The apology was not scripted. Everyone in the cabin could hear it in the weight of his voice. A ripple of murmurs spread. Passengers nodding, some clapping softly. Selina closed her eyes for a brief moment, accepting the words but knowing they were just the beginning. The plane carried them forward, but the conversation in the cabin kept circling back to her. A young mother leaned across the aisle, whispering, "What's going to happen when we land? There are reporters already, aren't there?" Selina opened her eyes again, her tone even. "Yes, they'll be waiting. They'll want a statement, a sound bite. But this isn't about sound bites. It's about changing the way people are treated, every day, in the smallest of ways." The mother nodded, her baby stirring softly against her shoulder. "I hope they listen." Selina's gaze shifted toward the window, clouds rolling beneath the wing like endless waves. She hoped so, too, but hope alone was never enough. At 10:35 a notification finally pushed through the Wi-Fi queue on her phone. It was a news alert. North Star Airways shares drop 14% after viral video. Her stomach tightened, not with fear for money, but with the knowledge of how corporate boards moved under pressure. They didn't bend to morality, only to markets. If reform was going to stick, it had to hit where the numbers lived. Passengers near her row leaned into conversations about the news. 14%. One whispered, "That's billions." Another added, "Maybe that's what it takes. They'll listen if their pockets hurt." Selina said nothing, but she thought of her grandfather's words again. Power isn't about what you hold. It's about what you release. Perhaps today's fall was not destruction, but the release necessary to build anew. The boy, Jalen, turned back toward her nervously. "Ms. Carter, do you ever get scared?" Selina looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Of course, fear never goes away. It just learns to ride alongside you. The trick is not letting it take the controls." Jalen smiled faintly, reassured, and sat back down. The cabin quieted again, the rhythm of the flight settling into something almost normal. But it was a fragile normal, like glass balanced on the edge of a table. Everyone knew it could shatter again with a single notification, a single word, a single truth. Selina rested her notebook on her knees once more, flipping it open to a new page. She wrote slowly, deliberately. Responsibility begins where silence ends. The letters were steady, her hand unshaking. She underlined it once, then closed the notebook again. For the first time since boarding, she allowed herself to lean back fully against the seat, her shoulders relaxing into the headrest. Her eyes closed, just for a moment, but her mind did not rest. It mapped the road ahead, the press conference, the reforms, the weight of expectation. She was no longer anonymous, no longer just a passenger. She had become something larger, whether she wanted it or not. And as the engines carried flight NS-247 across the endless sky, Selina Carter understood the landing would be only the beginning. By 11:15 a.m., The cabin of Flight NS-247 felt less like a sealed tube in the sky and more like a chamber where history was being distilled. Screens glowed with half-loaded pages, cached images of headlines multiplying across feeds, even without steady Wi-Fi. The fragments that made it through were enough to shape the mood Selina Carter breaks silence at 35,000 feet. North Star in crisis. Passengers speak out. Some travelers whispered, astonished that they were in the middle of it all. Others shifted uneasily, as though proximity to the moment made them culpable. The hum of the engines carried everything forward, relentless, offering no pause. Selina Carter sat in her seat, her notebook balanced on her knees, her pen moving steadily. She was drafting not speeches, not statements, but thoughts. Raw fragments of truth. She wrote lines like, "Silence breeds rot," and "Dignity cannot be checked at the gate." Her handwriting was precise, her sentences short, each word weighed, considered. A shadow fell across her tray. She looked up to see the young mother from earlier, the one cradling a baby. The child slept now, cheek pressed against her shoulder. The mother's eyes were red, not from tears but from exhaustion and conflict. "Ms. Carter," she whispered, her voice trembling. "When you spoke earlier about silence, I realized I've been silent my whole life. In school, at work, on flights like this, I always told myself it wasn't my fight, but she swallowed hard today. I see that it always was. I'm sorry." Selina set her pen down. Her voice was soft, but every syllable carried intention. Change doesn't come from apologies. It comes from action. If you want to break the silence, start with the next moment. Speak when it matters. Speak when it's hardest. The woman nodded quickly, gripping her child a little tighter. "I will," she whispered, before slipping back into her row. A man across the aisle leaned forward, curiosity edged with guilt. "Ms. Carter, are you going to speak when we land?" To the reporters, Selina held his gaze. The question had been echoing in her mind since Richard Lawson's message. Should she step into the storm herself, or let him shield her with corporate language? She hadn't decided, but she answered truthfully. "I don't know yet." The man looked surprised, as though he expected certainty, but Selina didn't flinch from his reaction. Leadership, she knew, wasn't about pretending to have every answer. It was about choosing when to reveal the questions. At the back of the plane, Kayla Monroe scribbled furiously. Her magazine margins were filled with notes now, arrows pointing to phrases, underlined words, calm, accountability, pattern. She imagined herself one day telling her children she had been there, that she had heard Selina Carter speak before the world crowned her a symbol. But the thought unsettled her. Was it right to turn someone's pain into a story for others to consume? She chewed the edge of her pen, lost in the conflict. The quiet broke when the suited man in row 10 spoke again, though softer than before. "You know, not everything's about race. Sometimes it's just personalities clashing." This time, the response came not from Selina, but from an elderly black man 2 rows back. His voice was gravelly, lined with years. "I've been flying since the 60s, he said. "I've seen every excuse in the book. Personalities, policies, procedures. Funny how those excuses always fall the same way, on the same people." The cabin stilled. The man's weathered face, his tired eyes, spoke a truth that needed no elaboration. The suited passenger turned away. Chastened by the weight of history he couldn't dismiss, Selina inclined her head toward the older man. silent gratitude passing between them. For decades he had carried a burden in silence. Today he had spoken. At 11:45, Mum. The captain's voice returned, firmer now. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent into San Francisco in about 40 minutes. Weather is clear. Estimated arrival remains on time. Passengers stirred, fastening seat belts loosely, packing away books and devices. But the energy in the cabin was far from routine. People whispered about the reporters they knew would be waiting, the cameras, the headlines. Some worried aloud about being caught on film. Others said quietly, almost defiantly, that they hoped they were. Selina closed her notebook, slipping it into her bag. Her heart thudded with steady rhythm. She thought of Richard Lawson's message again, his plea for guidance. She thought of the boy Jalen, of Adrian, the flight attendant, of the young mother and the elderly man. Their voices mattered too. Perhaps her words on the ground could amplify theirs. But doubt crept in. If she spoke, would she become nothing more than a symbol to be consumed, dissected, turned into hashtags if she stayed silent? Would she fail the people who had finally found their courage because she had shown hers? The conflict churned inside her like unseen turbulence, pressing against her chest. She gazed out the window. The Pacific coast was still distant, but the arc of descent had begun. Clouds parted, sunlight streaked the cabin. For a fleeting moment, she let herself breathe in the quiet beauty of it, the horizon wide, the world vast, her place within it simultaneously immense and infinitesimal. Adrian appeared again, pausing near her row. His expression was tentative but hopeful. "Ms. Carter," he said softly, "when we land, whatever you decide to do, I want you to know you gave me courage today, to not stay silent next time." Maybe that doesn't mean much, but Selina cut him off gently. It means everything. Change begins with one person choosing differently. Don't underestimate that. Adrian's throat tightened. He nodded quickly, retreating to the galley, his shoulders squared a little more firmly than before. The engines began their descent hum, the slight tilt of the cabin signaling approach. Passengers straightened, the ritual of landing overtaking them. But beneath it all ran an undercurrent of anticipation. They weren't just preparing to touch down. They were preparing to step into a storm waiting on the ground. Selina placed her hands in her lap, her posture straight. She still hadn't decided whether she would speak to the reporters herself or let Richard Lawson lead. But she knew one thing with certainty. Whatever words she spoke or withheld would echo far beyond the tarmac. The child across the aisle stirred awake, blinking drowsily. He looked at her with sleepy curiosity. "Are you going to be on TV?" he asked innocently. Selina smiled faintly. "Maybe," she said. "Will you tell them the truth?" he pressed, his small voice carrying weight beyond his years. Selina's gaze softened. Always. The engines roared louder as the plane angled lower, the coastline beginning to shimmer faintly through breaks in the cloud. The cabin tightened seat belts, trays clicked shut, windows lifted. Everyone braced not for turbulence this time, but for impact with the world waiting below. And in 14C, Selina Carter steadied her breath. The sky behind her, the earth ahead. The choice still unresolved, but the resolve itself unshakable. The descent into San Francisco began with a gentle tilt of the aircraft, the faint pressure shift in ears reminding everyone that the flight was nearly over. The city below was still hidden by thin sheets of cloud, but the promise of arrival rippled through the cabin like a current. Passengers tightened seat belts, stowed laptops, and closed shades, though their eyes kept straying towards Selina Carter. She sat with her back straight, hands folded neatly in her lap. Outwardly, she looked calm, but inside her chest was a storm. The decision she had wrestled with for the last hour pressed harder now. When the wheels touched down, when the cabin doors opened, the choice would no longer belong solely to her. Reporters, cameras, microphones, they would demand words, demand clarity, and she had to decide whether to meet them head on. The captain's voice filled the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been cleared for approach. Weather is clear. Temperature in San Francisco is 62 degrees. We'll be on the ground in about 15 minutes. Please ensure your seatbacks and tray tables are upright." A ripple of movement followed, but no one was thinking about the weather. In row 14, passengers stole glances at Selina, some with sympathy, others with awe. Jalen, the teenage boy across the aisle, kept his eyes fixed on her, as though her calm might lend him courage too. Adrian, the young flight attendant, walked the aisle one last time, checking belts and bins. When he reached Selina's row, he paused. His voice was low, almost reverent. "They'll be waiting for you," he said. Selina met his gaze. "I know. You don't have to do it alone," he added. His eyes flickered toward the passengers, many of whom had shifted visibly since the gate. "People are with you now." She gave a faint nod, appreciating his words. "Thank you. Adrian." The engines hummed louder, the flaps extended, the city finally breaking through the clouds. The bay shimmered like glass, the Golden Gate Bridge a red line against the horizon. Yet, for everyone on board, the beauty of the view could not quiet the weight of the moment. Kayla Monroe gripped her phone tightly, recording even as the aircraft tilted for final approach. She whispered to herself, "This is it. This is history." The suited man in row 10 sat rigid, silent now. His earlier protests shrunk into discomfort. The elderly black passenger sat with his eyes closed, lips moving in what seemed like a prayer. The young mother held her baby closer, her eyes shining with anticipation and worry. Every row carried its own version of tension. At 11:58 a.m., the wheels struck the runway with a heavy thud, the plane bouncing once before settling. Gasps echoed as the brakes engaged, the engines roaring as the aircraft slowed. The familiar sound of arrival usually brought relief, but today it was only the beginning. The intercom clicked again. "Welcome to San Francisco," Captain Ramirez announced, his voice steadier than earlier in the flight. "Please remain seated until the aircraft comes to a complete stop at the gate. For those of you continuing on with us, we thank you for flying North Star. For everyone else, we wish you a safe journey." The usual line, but the words landed differently. Everyone knew this wasn't an ordinary journey. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers craned their necks toward the windows. Beyond the glass, cameras flashed. Reporters clustered in tight packs behind security ropes. Vans from major networks lined the service road. The tarmac itself had become a stage. The suited man muttered, "Unbelievable." But even he sounded subdued, as though the scale of attention had stripped him of defiance. The seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers shifted, gathering bags, but no one surged forward. Instead, eyes turned to row 14, waiting. Selina rose slowly, smoothing the crease of her blazer. She adjusted the strap of her bag, her movements deliberate, graceful. Her heart beat steady, though fast. She could feel every gaze on her, every expectation pressing down. Adrian approached from the galley, his voice hushed but certain. The captain asked if you'd like an escort. Media's already lined up outside. Selena's eyes flicked toward the window, where flashes lit the glass. Then she shook her head gently. I don't need an escort. I just need to walk. Adrian swallowed hard, nodded, and stepped back. Kayla's phone trembled in her hands. She whispered, "She's really going to do it." The elderly passenger opened his eyes, nodding slowly. It's time. The door finally opened with a hydraulic hiss. Sunlight spilled into the cabin, dazzling bright. The first-class passengers began to disembark, but even they glanced back, waiting for her. Some passengers lingered purposely, as though unwilling to leave until they saw what she would choose. Selena stepped into the aisle. Each movement felt magnified the lift of her chin, the calm set of her shoulders, the soft but steady steps forward. Passengers murmured encouragement as she passed. "We're with you," someone whispered. "Tell them," another said. As she neared the front, Captain Ramirez appeared from the cockpit, his cap tucked under his arm. He met her eyes, regret flickering across his face. "Ms. Carter," he said quietly, "I should have spoken sooner at the gate. I failed you there. I won't fail again." Selena studied him, her voice low but steady. "Then use your voice when others can't. That's how you make it right." He nodded, his jaw tight, before stepping aside to let her pass. The jet bridge stretched ahead, lined with uniformed staff and security. Beyond them, through the wide glass, cameras pulsed with relentless flashes. The roar of voices filtered faintly into the cabin, reporters shouting questions, the hum of a crowd hungry for words. Selena paused at the threshold, the line between anonymity and spotlight. She could let Richard Lawson speak, let corporate language smooth the edges, or she could step into the light herself, carry the story not as an executive but as a woman who had been shoved, insulted, humiliated, and who refused to stay silent. Her grandfather's words echoed again. "Power isn't about what you hold. It's about what you release." She exhaled slowly, her mind clear at last. Selena Carter stepped forward. The cameras exploded in light. Reporters surged against the ropes. Microphones extended like arrows. Shouts filled the air. "Carter, what happened on that plane? Do you plan to sue North Star? How does this change your role as owner?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the sea of faces, at the passengers disembarking behind her, at Adrian watching from the doorway, at Kayla holding her phone like a lifeline. Then she spoke, her voice steady, cutting through the chaos. What happened today was not about one woman, it was about dignity, and dignity cannot be denied, not on my airline, not on any airline, not anywhere. The crowd erupted with questions, flashes blinding, but Selena's words had landed. They were already rippling outward, captured on every lens, etched into every microphone. And with that, Selena Carter walked down the jet bridge, the world waiting on the other side. The jet bridge funneled into the terminal like a tunnel of noise and light. Cameras flared the moment Selena Carter stepped forward, their flashes reflecting off the polished floor, ricocheting across her calm face. A wall of reporters surged forward, corralled only by airport security. Their questions clashed in the air, urgent and overlapping. "Ms. Carter, what message do you have for North Star employees? Are you pressing charges against the crew?" Did you anticipate backlash before going public? Is this the end of North Star Airways as we know it? Selena paused just long enough for the roar to crest, then lifted a hand slightly. The gesture wasn't grand, but it quieted the crowd as if everyone remembered they were in the presence of someone who commanded gravity by her stillness alone. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and deliberate. Today is not about punishing one employee. It's about addressing a culture that allowed her behavior to continue unchecked. What happened to me is only one example of a pattern far too many passengers know well. That ends today. The reporters surged again, shouting for more. Behind her, Adrian stood near the cabin door, eyes wide as he watched. Kayla, still recording, held her phone higher, capturing every second. Passengers emerging behind Selena formed a loose cluster, some whispering to one another, others looking visibly shaken by the media storm. Richard Lawson, North Star's CEO, appeared through the throng with security flanking him. His expression was taut, his navy suit pressed to perfection, but his eyes betrayed the weight he carried. He approached Selena, leaned close enough for only her to hear. "They want you. The board wants me. We can't both be silent. You start. I'll follow." Selena gave a subtle nod. The choreography of accountability was beginning. Lawson turned to the microphones, his voice booming with practiced authority. "On behalf of North Star Airways, I want to extend a public apology to Ms. Carter and every passenger who witnessed this morning's incident. This behavior was unacceptable, inexcusable, and entirely against our values. Effective immediately. We are implementing a company-wide review of policies, retraining programs, and a zero-tolerance standard for discriminatory actions." A reporter shouted back, "Isn't that too little? Too late, North Star has faced complaints before." "Why now?" Lawson's jaw tightened. But before he could answer, Selena stepped forward again. Because this time, the silence broke. The words hit like a thunderclap. Cameras zoomed in, microphones craned forward. Selena held their gaze, unwavering. For too long, silence has protected the powerful and abandoned the vulnerable. But silence is no longer an option, not for me, not for this company, not for this industry. North Star Airways will either change from the inside out, or it will not fly at all. Gasps rippled through the press corps. Even Lawson glanced at her with a flicker of awe and perhaps fear. Behind the barricades, the first passengers began to speak, voices shaky but determined. The young mother cradling her baby stepped forward. I saw it. I saw her shoved and humiliated. I stayed quiet at first, but I won't anymore. What Ms. Carter said is true. It's not just one flight attendant. It's all of us deciding whether to speak or to stay silent. Reporters swiveled, cameras snapping her statement. The elderly man added his voice, his tone rough but resonant. I've seen this my whole life. I'm tired. But today, I'm glad I lived to see someone stand up in the middle of it and tell the truth. The momentum swelled. More passengers chimed in, recounting what they saw, what they felt. Each testimony added fuel to a fire that could no longer be contained. Yet, for every supportive voice, resistance sharpened too. On social media, which Kayla checked in snatches, the backlash was already forming accusations of exaggeration, hashtags claiming Selena staged the moment for attention, bots and trolls calling her privileged. The divide was growing as fast as the story itself. Kayla whispered to herself, "They'll twist it. They always twist it." Her stomach clenched, but her phone didn't waver. She knew her footage mattered. Back at the microphones, reporters pressed harder. "Ms. Carter, are you planning a lawsuit? Do you intend to fire more staff? Do you feel safe traveling with your own airline?" Selena chose her response carefully. Safety isn't just about seatbelts and engines. It's about knowing your dignity will be respected from the moment you step through the gate. That is the standard North Star will meet, or it will not deserve passengers' trust. Her words carried the cadence of a promise, but also of a challenge. Cameras recorded every syllable, the sound already streaming to millions. Lawson stepped in again, his voice firmer now, echoing her tone. "We will be working hand in hand with Ms. Carter to overhaul our systems immediately. This is not public relations. This is survival for our company, for our reputation, for the values we claim to uphold." For a moment, the terminal itself seemed to quiet, as though even the building recognized a shift. Selena exhaled slowly, her decision affirmed. Speaking had been the only choice. Silence would have been complicity. Passengers began to disperse, though many lingered, watching her as if reluctant to step away from history unfolding. Some clapped softly, hesitant but sincere. The sound grew, rolling like a small wave that swelled into something larger. Applause filled the terminal, not orchestrated, not forced, but rising organically from witnesses who had seen dignity restored before their eyes. Selena allowed herself one small smile, not of triumph, but of resolve. She knew applause was fleeting, the harder work was still ahead. But for now, the sound of voices finally, firmly breaking silence was enough. Behind the cameras, the suited man from row 10 slipped quietly into the crowd, his shoulders hunched. He had no words now, only the memory of his own silence. Kayla lowered her phone at last, her arms trembling. She whispered, "This is going to change everything." The elderly man gave a short nod. "It already has." Outside the terminal, headlines were already being written. Live feeds spun into narratives, analysis churned across networks. But for those who had walked through the storm inside Flight NS-247, the story was no longer just news. It was personal. Selena Carter turned from the microphones, the glare of cameras fading behind her as she walked toward the awaiting convoy. Her path forward was uncertain, the challenges immense, the backlash inevitable, but her choice was made, her silence broken. And with that, the weight of change shifted from possibility to inevitability. The convoy from the airport terminal to North Star headquarters was escorted by flashing lights. But Selena Carter barely noticed the blur of San Francisco's streets through the tinted glass. She sat with her hands clasped loosely in her lap, her notebook tucked securely beside her. Richard Lawson sat across from her, his posture rigid, his phone vibrating with non-stop alerts. "They're waiting," he said finally, his voice low, almost apologetic. "The board, the press, the unions, everyone. They want answers before the markets reopen tomorrow." Selena studied him calmly. "Then we give them more than answers. We give them a plan." Lawson nodded, though his expression betrayed doubt. He had led board meetings for decades, weathered crises from crashes to strikes, but this felt different. The power wasn't in his hands alone anymore. Selena's quiet presence in the car made that undeniable. When they arrived, cameras swarmed the steps of the headquarters tower. Flashes burst like lightning against the steel and glass facade. Selena and Lawson entered through a side door, guided by security. But even then, chants from outside carried through the walls, voices demanding accountability, change, dignity. The boardroom was filled before they arrived. Executives in tailored suits sat stiffly around the mahogany table, their eyes sharp, guarded. Some looked relieved to see Selina, others looked threatened. She could read it in their posture, their clenched jaws, the quick flick of their eyes toward Lawson as if to ask who's really in charge. Lawson opened the meeting. His tone was brisk, efficient. "We're here to address the incident on Flight NS-247 and its fallout. We've already seen a 14% drop in stock value. The market is punishing us. Public trust is collapsing. We need immediate action." One board member, a man with a clipped accent and silver cufflinks, leaned forward. The incident was regrettable, but it was one employee. "Do we risk destabilizing the company by overreacting?" Selina spoke for the first time. Her voice was calm, but it carried an edge that silenced the room. This wasn't one employee. This was a system that allowed her to act without fear of consequence. That's not a glitch. It's a design flaw, and you don't patch a design flaw with half measures. Another executive bristled. "Ms. Carter, with respect, your role is ownership, not operations. The CEO handles policy." Selina met his eyes evenly. "Ownership gives me more than dividends. It gives me responsibility. If dignity can't be guaranteed in every seat, then North Star doesn't deserve to fly. And I won't invest in failure." The words landed like a hammer. Lawson cleared his throat, recognizing the seismic shift. "She's right. This isn't about PR spin. It's structural, which is why I propose we implement a new standard immediately." Selina opened her notebook, sliding it onto the table. Written in her precise hand was a framework. We call it the Dignity Protocol. 3 pillars: accountability, transparency, and training. She outlined it with steady precision. First, accountability. Every incident of passenger mistreatment must be reported directly to a central system accessible by executives, bypassing local managers who too often buried complaints. Second, transparency. Data on complaints, outcomes, and corrective actions must be published quarterly for both shareholders and the public. Third, training. Mandatory, recurring, evidence-based bias and de-escalation training for all frontline staff, tied directly to performance evaluations and advancement opportunities. She finished simply. This isn't about punishment. It's about culture. A culture where dignity is as non-negotiable as safety. The boardroom was silent. Some scribbled notes, others frowned, but none dared dismiss her outright. The authority in her voice was undeniable. Lawson leaned forward, reinforcing her point. "We've seen the markets. Investors are already whispering about lawsuits, about mass boycotts. If we don't adopt this protocol now, we won't recover, not just financially, culturally." One board member finally broke the silence. "What about the unions? The crew associations they'll resist." Selina didn't flinch. "Then they can choose whether to defend dignity or to defend discrimination, and they'll answer to the public either way." The vote was called before midnight. 11 in favor, 1 abstaining. The Dignity Protocol passed. Outside, when the announcement hit the press, the effect was immediate. News outlets carried the headline, "North Star adopts historic dignity protocol after owner confronts board." The stock, volatile all day, steadied slightly in after-hours trading. Social media erupted. Hashtags multiplying, "Here Dignity Protocol," "No more silence. Selena Carter." But the backlash was swift too. Anonymous accounts flooded platforms with attacks, calling her a grandstander, an opportunist. Some claimed the incident had been exaggerated. Others insisted she was destroying jobs for hard-working crew. Threats filled her inbox within hours. Selena read some of them, her face unreadable, before closing her phone. She felt the weight of it pressing against her chest. For a moment, in the quiet of her hotel room that night, she wondered if the cost was too high. Was it worth it to stand alone against a tide that seemed endless? Then she remembered the boy Jalen's eyes when he asked if she was scared. She remembered the elderly man's prayerful words, the mother's trembling apology, Adrian's quiet vow. She wasn't alone. Their voices were with her, multiplied now by thousands who had seen, who had heard, who could no longer pretend silence was neutral. Days turned to weeks. The reforms began to roll out. Training modules launched. Complaint portals went live. Quarterly reports were drafted. For the first time, passengers saw data in black and white proof of accountability, where before there had been only whispers. Complaints didn't vanish, but how they were handled shifted. Staff began to speak more cautiously, more respectfully, aware that silence no longer shielded them, and slowly something changed in the culture of the skies. 6 months later, North Star released its first public accountability report. Complaints of bias had dropped by 63%. Passenger satisfaction had risen by nearly 40%. Employee surveys showed morale improving, with frontline staff reporting they felt better supported and better trained. Selena sat in her office overlooking the bay, the report in her hands. She read the numbers carefully, then set them down. Progress was measurable, but the deeper change was harder to quantify the shift in what people expected, what they demanded. The door opened softly. Adrian stepped inside, his uniform crisp, his expression brighter than months earlier. "Ms. Carter," he said, his voice steady now. "I just wanted to thank you again. The training, it's working. It's not perfect, but it's different, and that's because of you." Selena smiled faintly. "Not because of me, because people chose to stop being silent." He nodded, understanding, before excusing himself. Selena turned back toward the window. The city shimmered beneath the late sun, the sky streaked with gold. She thought of her grandfather again, of the wisdom he left her. Power isn't about what you hold. It's about what you release. She had released her silence. Others had followed. The storm of that flight had not ended with the landing, it had only begun. And though the cost had been heavy, though the backlash still simmered, Selena Carter knew with unshakable certainty that the sky itself had shifted. Selena Carter's flight ended hours after takeoff, but the echoes of what happened still ripple today. One woman's calm refusal to accept humiliation forced an entire industry to confront its failures. She transformed pain into policy, shame into accountability, and silence into a movement. Her story isn't just about an airline or a single crew member. It's about every person who has ever been told they don't belong, who's ever been asked to shrink themselves to make others comfortable. It's about the power of choosing dignity even when the world looks away. We leave this story with both heartbreak and hope. Heartbreak that discrimination can still happen in the most ordinary places. Hope that courage, when it refuses to stay silent, can bend even the most rigid systems toward justice. Selena Carter showed us that true strength is not loud, it is steady. It listens, it empathizes, it acts, and it reminds us all dignity is not negotiable. If this story moved you, if it stirred anger and compassion in equal measure, we ask you to carry it forward. Like this video, share it with those who need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next story that challenges us to see more, feel more, and do more. Together, let's keep the conversation alive.